lack access to electricity despite global energy poverty having decreased about 80% since 2010. By providing electricity access to 300 million of those Africans who lack access to electricity by 2030 could boost Africa's GDP by 500 billion US dollars by 2040. This is one of the key findings of the Boston Consulting Group, or BCG, a report titled Unleashing Africa, Powering Prosperity Through Energy Access. To chat to us further about African energy and their report, we're now joined on the line by Kesh Mudaly, Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group Johannesburg. Kesh, good morning to you and thanks for making time.
Good morning, Asanda. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Please take us through your report titled Unleashing Africa, Powering Prosperity Through Energy Access, that speaks about access to energy in Africa.
Yeah, sure, certainly. So I think you made a good point up front talking about the socioeconomic benefits of energy access in Africa. And I'd start by saying that there are no income-rich, energy-poor countries in the world. Energy access and the access or the availability of affordable, reliable power is a key driver of economic growth across the globe. Wherever you look, the correlation of energy consumption per capita versus GDP per capita is fairly linear. And you'll have a look at the exhibit within the report that we published, which shows very clearly a lot of African countries are stalling in that regard. Energy access remains a key bottleneck. And of the 600 million people that do not have access to energy, 500 million are in sub-Saharan Africa. So it is very much a sticky problem that we've seen persist for the last couple of decades or so. And so I think the time for change is very much now. There are huge advancements when you think about technology. There are huge advancements when you think very importantly about finance and the role that finance can play in unlocking some of this capital needed to actually fund the infrastructure to connect these homes. And so we think that there is an inflection point now that Africa must take that opportunity around. Ghana is a great example of what good could look like here. If you look at Ghana, they were sitting at an energy access penetration of around 1% in rural Ghana, around 1990 or so. By 2014, that number was up to 63%. And that was through innovative financial schemes from the government, subsidizing the poor, but also off-grid solutions that they pioneered and really drove regulatory certainty around to make sure that the investments that were going into those infrastructure could actually come to bear. So it is possible. It is a big challenge that the continent has to grapple with now. And it's not a very easy challenge to grapple with. If you think about the dispersed nature of populations in Africa, one of the biggest things that makes energy infrastructure bankable is what we call energy demand density. So that is how much demand do you have in every square kilometer that you look off in the continent. And because that's very low, it means it's very difficult to make traditional energy infrastructure bankable. So that's one of the key challenges that we highlight in the report. We also highlight risks around foreign currency risk and the high cost of capital in the continent. And then the crux of the report really gets to 5 key solutions that we recommend that Africa needs to rally around. And that is strengthening governing reforms or planning and government reforms, upgrading and expanding grid infrastructure. That is a theme we see globally now. Scaling distributed renewable energy. So think about your rooftop solar systems, think about microgrids in that space. Unlocking capital through innovative financial partnerships. We talk about blended finance in that bucket. And then lastly, driving productive uses of energy. That is a critical enabler to ensure that there is sustainable development around these energy infrastructure that's being developed.
So quite a few barriers and challenges you touch on there. But from that, let's talk about what most people might not know, the correlation between energy access and the gross domestic product of the continent. Please tell us more.
Yeah, so when you look at energy access, we talk about this in terms of what we measure by kilowatt hours consumed per capita. So that is a total quantum of energy that's consumed by each consumer. And then if you look at its or the correlation to GDP, there is a very direct linear relationship between that. So if you've got a high consumption of electricity per capita or high kilowatt hours of consumption per capita, you effectively have a correlation with high GDP growth per capita. And the key driver behind that is the fact that when you have a high energy consumption, it speaks to productive uses of energy in the economy. So effectively manufacturing, mining, and if you look at sort of the new age of what's driving demand across the globe right now, digital infrastructure, data centers, telecoms towers, etc. So it is an indirect signal, or maybe you call it a leading indicator of what a good, successful, thriving economy can look like. And it's one of the key reasons why we push for energy access as being such a critical challenge to solve in Africa, because you cannot solve the economic challenge without solving the energy access challenge.
Let's talk about how energy can catalyze development in Africa and explain how this is possible. You do say it is.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you look at what's happening, I'll use Ghana again. It's a really great example. So Ghana, as I mentioned, were able to make huge strides when it comes to energy access in its rural populations. That, of course, drives integration of rural populations into the economy. What do I mean by that? It means being integrated into education systems, being integrated into the jobs economy of the country. And that, of course, creates socioeconomic upliftment. That creates the critical mass you need for industry to thrive. So if you look sort of a decade on from 2014, what has Ghana done since? They've done a really innovative policy around incentivizing industrial tariffs. So going beyond the individual consumer, looking at industries, and they've got a thriving smelter industry on the verge of scaling up now because of government policy, because of investment certainty that they've been able to drive in the country. And on the back of that comes investments in industrial capacity, which of course links to job growth and GDP growth.
So take us through some of the recommendations in your report towards achieving energy access in the African continent. I guess a lot of them will also take examples from Ghana.
Yeah, 100%. And look, what's great to see is I think on all of these solutions that I'm going to talk about, you will see examples of that playing out in the African continent. Of course, it's very de-averaged depending on where in the continent you look. But I think it's not to say that there is nothing happening at all. If you think just about finance mobilization, we need about $90 billion to be mobilized by 2030. We've got about 50 billion of that already. Now, the devil is in the detail. It's not just the commitment of the 50 billion, it's the deployment of the 50 billion that will count the most. And so maybe I'll start with that as one of the key recommendations of the report is unlocking capital through innovative financial partnerships. So what we talk about here is the use of blended finance structures. So commercial finance comes from your typical banks that you would typically engage on a day-to-day basis. Commercial concessional finance is finance that comes at, for example, lower interest rates, longer payback periods, and that can lower the cost of capital together with things like what we call first loss capital, which is typically coming from philanthropic sources. Blending that all together effectively means that you've got a much more palatable financial solution for an infrastructure developer in Africa. And so we see some examples of that playing out already in the continent. And that, I think, is a massive unlock for development of energy infrastructure, particularly when thinking about energy access, given that you've got this low threshold of affordability in the most rural populations in the world. So that's recommendation number one, unlocking finance through innovative financial partnerships. Number two is linked to government planning and policy. So thinking about integrated infrastructure planning, if you're thinking about grid development, if you're thinking about energy planning, if you're thinking about financial planning, even when you think about commitments to the fiscus, all of that needs to be integrated. It's not about having one silver bullet in one particular policy or the other. It's about driving integration amongst that policy framework and then making sure you've got enough capacity in government to deliver on those policies and administer those policies. That, of course, then leads to investor confidence, which will, of course, then lead to infrastructure being built, which will connect the millions of people we mentioned before. So that's recommendation number two. Number
let's
three
get the
speaks
last
to
one, Kesh,
upgrading.
because we are running out of time. I think we'll cover three. Yes.
Yeah, happy to. Maybe I'll end on the third and probably one of the most important one, which is upgrading grid infrastructure. Upgrading grid infrastructure is critical to make this work. It's not just about creating distributed energy solutions with rooftop solar, and then you've got a rural population that's disconnected from the grid. The grid must advance in parallel to these microgrid and solutions being developed. And we've actually worked on a few projects in Africa where that happens. Government basically planning the coalescence of these two different means of connecting people to the grid. And making sure that that is done at a national level. So I would leave you with that, Sandra. Sorry for running over time there, but yeah, that's the thrust of the report.
It's no problem, and it's educating us. So thank you so much for your insights.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Pleasure. Kesh Mudaly is Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group Johannesburg, speaking to us on the line about the possibilities for Africa's energy and how to shift from an energy poverty continent to one that is thriving on that front. All right, so coming up after Rise and Shine is On the Move with Bailes